let's turn from there to our other focus. Oxfam's inequality virus report released on the opening day of the World Economic Forum in Davos. It reveals that the COVID-induced lockdown has only widened inequalities in India and across the world. While the rich have got richer, the poor are struggling. Take a look.
The COVID pandemic took a serious human toll. Apart from deaths and economic slowdown, the virus brought inequality, hitting the most vulnerable the hardest. Non-profit anti-poverty group Oxfam says the virus made India's super rich richer and poor poorer. While billionaires were richer by 35%, 84% households lost some income. It adds up to 1.7 lakh jobs lost every hour in April last year. Oxfam says the poor may take as long as 10 years to recover from the shock.
That's a huge gap, and this inequality is just rising. So to redistribute, we need to make sure we are taxing appropriately. And with that, we would raise enough funds to make sure we protect everybody.
The mega rich, however, got the biggest pandemic perks.
We need to understand that inequality is not inevitable. It is a policy choice, it's a political choice. So we need to have very focused measures to fight inequality. And introducing, say, wealth tax is one of them. Taxing the super rich is one of them.
India's top 100 billionaires gained nearly 13 trillion rupees. Enough to give nearly a lakh for each of India's 13.8 crore poor. Or enough to sustain the rural job scheme or India's health expenditure for 10 years. With Aishwarya Paliwal, Bureau Report, India Today.
And in the lead up to the budget, we'll have several special guests joining us. Joining me today is India's Nobel Laureate, Dr. Abhijit Banerjee. Dr. Banerjee, appreciate your joining us. You've just seen that Oxfam report which suggests widening income inequalities, the union budget to that extent next week, under the shadow of COVID pandemic, declining economic growth, widening inequalities. What do you believe, in a sense, is the big challenge? Addressing rising inequalities, or first tackling falling growth, or both?
Well, at one level, I think there is an obvious implication of this, which is that we should try to avoid doing what we usually do, which is in every budget and every government, what it does is it finds a way to cut some taxes or the other. And we're sort of, taxes on financial transactions, taxes on income, taxes on wealth. We're really sort of a budget is seen as an occasion for a tax cut. And I think if we want to take this implication of this seriously, we see that there should be higher taxes on the rich coming out of it. We're really in a budgetary crunch, and we'll discuss maybe later what we need the money for. And especially if we want to boost redistribution and boost demand, the government is saying that it's fiscally constrained in boosting demand. We really need the money. So I would say that probably the one thing it says is that at least fairly substantial increase in the taxes on the rich and the consumption of the rich might be warranted.
You're talking about an increase in taxes on the rich. But the critical question is, how do you stimulate growth? Because that is going to really be the challenge of our times. Unless you stimulate growth, how do you reduce inequalities? Do you do that by raising taxes, or do you do that by, in a way, stimulating demand?
Well, I think that part of it is just more redistribution. I think there is just the ongoing effects of the pandemic continue. I think many small businesses just collapsed in this, and it's not I mean, it's not all fixable. I'm not particularly blaming anybody for it, but it just was a bit of a disaster for many people. And I think that if we don't take that seriously and kind of open the purse strings, now to open the purse strings, the government has basically been hesitant. And the reason it's been hesitant is that it feels that the budget deficit is going to balloon, and it's already ballooned, but it will balloon more, and then that will have implications for our credit ratings or other things. Whether that's true or not, I'm not actually so convinced that it's true, but nonetheless, that's been the position. So especially if the government wants to be fiscally conservative, then it needs to raise money to pay for the fiscal expansion. The fiscal expansion won't happen for free. It will need some money to be transferred. I think a lot of the corporate sector is actually flushed with cash and sitting on cash right now. So investments are slow because demand is slow. So I think it's in everybody's interest to take some of the money that's sort of sitting in the hands of the rich and transfer it to the poor.
But, you know,
the less rich.
Yeah, but the challenge of our times, in a way, is to also stimulate employment. How do you stimulate employment without, in a way, giving incentives to those who perhaps believe that they need tax breaks? It's an issue raised before every budget. Do you give tax breaks to stimulate employment generation, or do you, as you seem to be suggesting, increase taxes in a way to just get in more revenue and then redistribute that?
I mean, I'm saying this with full cognizance of that debate. I'm less convinced that, and I think this is where the evidence is, that, you know, these tax incentives do very much. I think they have short-term effects, but not very much long-term effects. I think if there was robust demand for goods, people will invest. If the banking sector works, people will invest. So I would have prioritizing increasing demand and increasing demand from the low to middle income population, and the rich are already rich enough. They're getting richer. They're sitting on their money. So I think if you tax them, you know, some of that money will come to the government. Can spend it, and then if that will boost demand. And on the other side, I think, you know, finding ways to get the banking sector to work is going to be more important for getting investment started across the, except in the from the very top of the industrial distribution. So I think that this is a false duality. I think right now we need demand, and I don't think the incentives are there. Either incentives are not there because there's no demand.
So the demand, of course, is the major challenge, and the other challenge you're saying is how do you redistribute wealth? There is also the challenge of public spending. Many believe this is a great opportunity to prioritize public spending, speed up investment, speed up government investments in infrastructure. To that extent, what happens then to fiscal responsibility, fiscal stability at the moment? Do you believe that we should forsake it and just focus on a higher level of spending in 2021-22?
I think that's also basically where even the government has kind of led the budget. The budgetary restrictions kind of fall a little bit by the wayside, and I think that's the obvious implication. I think we did it too late. I think we should have started doing it, right in March. In a sense, we should have started just spending more money, and then we wouldn't have 23% shrinkage. I think we were very proper in the macroeconomic sense, and that's for me that's always been a little bit of a mystery why we are so unwilling to just spend money, do fiscal to do fiscal easing, using quantitative easing, printing money. Basically the European community did that, the US did that. Why didn't we do it? But I think yes, that, but also I think raising taxes at the same time so that we don't overstretch our fiscal boundaries. I think both would make it easier for the government to spend money. I think that my sense is that the constraint on investment is not money in the hands of the corporate sector, but just lack of demand. So I think if there is a stimulus to demand through investment, through employment, through increased public spending also on social transfers. I think all of that would be good for the corporate sector in the sense that they would then have a reason to invest.
But where would you prioritize? You're saying, you're talking of social transfers, presumably cash transfers. Is that what you're suggesting, that you need to put money at the bottom of the pyramid at a moment like that? Is that a priority? Where do you prioritize when it comes to putting money at the moment in this economy?
Well, I think that we've sort of had a very long list of public infrastructure investments that we have postponed forever. That's one place where we need to put it. But let me say one important thing that is looming, and that's going to be the constraint on all of this, which is that I think the Reserve Bank has now been estimating that the NPAs of the banks will on average rise to over 14%, and that of the public sector banks to over 16%. So that's going to be the government has been very mindful of that. That was why I think a lot of the initial fiscal effort that it put in was basically monetary effort to which were letting debtors not repay their debts, but then basically that means you need to compensate the banks. So I do think that the banks are very, very fragile, and if the banks are fragile, they won't lend to the people who need lending, which are the people who need a restart. So I think we are really in a bind in terms of the banking sector, and so I don't know how to quite parse this problem, because it's a huge problem. It's with that much NPA, the banks are going to be paralyzed in lending, and I think that if we don't do something about that, then we're going to be sitting. Everybody's going to be sitting on their hands, and so I think there is a question. My heart's desire is more social transfers, to be honest, even before infrastructure. I think just a lot of people are still hurting a lot from the pandemic. And I think that especially the people who relied more on, informal sector employment, they're hurting. So I would like more social transfers, but I think that I also see that the priorities of the government might be to do something on the banking sector, and there just the volume of money needed is enormous. So I feel that that's going to also be on the minds of the finance minister.
I think broadly what you're talking is a recharting of priorities in a way, focusing on small, micro enterprises, focusing on the unorganized sector. Now, the government is talking about a V-shaped recovery. The Reserve Bank is also talking about it. Do you believe the worst is over? And do you go along with those who believe that that things will only get better now? Or could we still have difficulties in 2021-22?
I think that there has been a recovery, obviously. And I think people are desperately trying to find something to do. I mean, people are there's just so much, we have so little social support that I think people are doing something. So I think that we will see recovery. I think whether the recovery, speed of the recovery, I think it's anybody's guess. I think it will depend very much on some of the policies that are initiated now, basically policies on how much demand there is in the economy, how much finance there is in the economy, do the SME sector, does the SME sector get credit, etc. So I think that we can't. There's no one V-shaped recovery which is independent of policy. It will depend very much on the choices that the government makes.
Just a final word, therefore, from you for the finance minister. She's got a tough, unenviable task, most believe. But if you had a final word, what would that be?
Don't use tax incentives for the rich.
Don't use tax incentives for the rich. Okay, what you're seemingly suggesting, therefore, may run counter to some of the prevailing wisdom, but it's always a privilege talking to you, Dr. Abhijit Banerjee. You're saying focus on redistribution of wealth. This is a moment to reach out to those at the bottom of the pyramid. Thank you so much for joining me here on the news today, on a day when, remember, income inequalities only seem to be widening.
Hello everyone, this is Rahul Kamal here. Hope you enjoyed this video. For the latest news and analysis, like and subscribe the India Today YouTube channel, and don't forget to press the bell icon to stay updated.